Welcome to First Dates and Soulmates, the podcast that will forgive Cary Grant pretty much anything, so long as he wears that suit. I am your co-host, Nikki McKnight.
I'm Meg Casebolt.
And today we're talking, Cary Grant is here because we are talking the romantic comedies of the 1940s. Y'all, we are getting historical today. We are looking at black and white films of the 1940s. Today we're going to be discussing the top romantic comedies of all time as per, the internet bastion that is Rotten Tomatoes. Today we're going to be talking about The Philadelphia Story and His Girl Friday. Meg, what is your experience with these films or black and white 1940s films in general?
I feel like this was like, I knew who Jimmy Stewart was. I knew who Katharine Hepburn was. I knew who Cary Grant was. But when was the last time I actually sat down to watch one of their movies? Aside from like It's a Wonderful Life, not very frequently. And so when you pitched this to me, I was like, it feels like we're doing our own sort of deep dive into film studies a little bit. And I loved that it was like, we get to take the stories from that time and place them up against our modern feminist sort of anti-capitalist approach to things. Like, it's a really interesting dive into history and how much things have changed.
Yeah. Had you seen either of these films before?
No.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm excited. So this was my idea because as I've said, I love film, and I just had this idea in my head. I'm like, maybe we should do an episode on like the top romantic comedies of all time. So I Googled it, fully thinking it was going to be something like When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, You've Got Mail. Like I was expecting.
You were expecting all Meg Ryan.
90s.
All the time.
I was expecting Meg Ryan. I felt like the entire episode was going to be about Meg Ryan. So imagine my surprise when I log, and Rotten Tomatoes literally has the top romantic comedies of all time. And the top like 5 are all from the 1940s. And I kind of went, what? Excuse me? Then I kind of looked at them, and I had seen His Girl Friday before. I actually watched it. The year I turned 36 was during the height of the pandemic, and I had this idea of everybody was, it was like a year in, and we were all kind of locked at home, and I said, I'm going to come up with a list of 36 things I got to do before I turn 36, just as a fun activity. And there was things like I got to do drag makeup, I got to get a tattoo, but tattoo parlors were closed, so I got like a fake tattoo. But one of them was watch a black and white film. Because I hadn't really seen many of them, if any, and then I randomly picked His Girl Friday and really enjoyed it. So when I saw it show up on the list of romantic comedies, I kind of went, ooh, this might be interesting to do. Yeah. And then when I started looking into like the historical context of what was film in the 1940s, and all of the cultural, political things that were happening, I was like, interesting. Because when we talk about historical and romance, we talk about Regency, we talk about Victorian, we don't really talk about 1940s that often. So that's how we got here. That is how we arrived here today.
I started with His Girl Friday, and one of the first shots of that movie is women who are working the switchboard. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother was a switchboard operator during the war, before the war. So it was like, this is grounding me in the time period of, this is when my grandma was around. This is when, and so putting it in that context and saying, this is sort of like maybe how my grandparents would have interacted and expected each other. Although, like, I'm just going to come out and say it. The fact that both our heroines were divorced was shocking to me.
Yes. Very much so. Very much so.
Because who would divorce Cary Grant? Hello.
A lot of people, on screen and off. 1940s, he had some drama going on. But, okay.
But both of them were women-led divorces, too. Which
was,
I mean, I don't know if you've done any of this research on it, but as far as I know, that was even less common, is not just to be divorced, but to have the woman drive the divorce.
Oh, just wait till we get to talking about the very sexy Hays Code for motion pictures.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to give you all a really quick summary of both of these films. So first up, His Girl Friday, released in 1940, has a 99% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. And it is when hard-charging New York newspaper editor Walter Burns, played by Cary Grant, discovers that his ex-wife, investigative reporter Hildy Johnston, has gotten engaged. He decides to lure her away from the domestic life that she is seeking, to follow a story about a man who's on death row, and shenanigans ensue. Hildy is his ex-wife, played by Rosalind Russell. And then we also we watched The Philadelphia Story, also released in 1940, starring Cary Grant. It has a 100% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. And this is a classic romantic comedy focusing on Tracy Lord. She's a Philadelphia socialite who has separated, who split from her husband, C.K. Dexterhaven. Oh my God, what a name.
C.K. Dexterhaven.
Oh my God. Also played by Cary Grant. And she's getting ready to marry a man named George Kittredge. And she crosses paths with both Dexter and a reporter, Macaulay Connor, played by James Stewart, as well as the photographer. What is happening like prior to the wedding, and how is that going to end up? Who knows? A Philadelphia Story. So Meg, I would love to get your impressions of both of these stories before we start diving deep into the historical context and some of the ways that these films have influenced the films that we're probably a little bit more familiar with.
I think my biggest surprise was how much agency the women had in both of them. You know, and both of the women, whether it was Hildy or Tracy, were saying like, I got out of a bad marriage. I'm thinking about going into a marriage with somebody who feels safer. Right? Who may not be as charismatic as the Cary Grant character in both of them, but who will give me the life that I have been told I deserve. Right? Where Bruce to Hildy is very much like, oh, I'll give you the home upstate. You know, your mother is my mother, sort of gives her that sense of belonging and home, and not the wildness of the newsroom. And on the same length, Tracy is there going, I wasn't happy with C.K. Dexterhaven. So she goes and she finds someone else. And even at the beginning, like her little preteen sister is like, why are you marrying this George guy when you could be married to C.K. Dexterhaven? Which they call Dexter, but come on, his name's C.K. Dexterhaven. You can't amazing. Not have it so be C.K. Dexterhaven.
Yeah.
And so I think that was my biggest surprise with both of them, is that it was one female character in both that were surrounded by men. And every man in those rooms respected the shit out of her. And that was a surprise to me for a historical. Because I think, you know, to your point, so often we see the Regencies and we see the Victorians where women can't do as much. Or we think about stories that are more in the 50s and 60s where some of those rights have been stripped back. But the 40s, there was a little bit of a, like, I don't want to say a renaissance, but there was a small women's rights movement happening at the time. Like, I have my grandma's master's degree hanging up behind me because there was a point at which women were in academia, and that got torn back at post-war after World War II. Here comes Meg's nerdy history minor. But, you know, like, this is such a moment in time that's really interesting to me in terms of what women could do, whether that's be the journalist in the workplace or divorce somebody who wasn't good for them and get married to someone else. You know, like that was the biggest takeaway for me, is this was okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree. One of the first things that struck me when I saw His Girl Friday for the first time, and again with Philadelphia Story, was the fact that they were divorced. Because my understanding was at the time was divorce was still a very big cultural no-no and very hard to get. And then what little I knew at the time about censorship and like kind of a pre-McCarthyism world, I was just kind of surprised with the representation of women. But I also found it interesting that, you know, they were both seeking out kind of that domestic structure. I think for Tracy, it was because of her father being a philanderer. And one of the reasons that she left C.K. Dexterhaven was because he was not her level in the social echelon. He was not from a wealthy socialite level of family. He did have money. He was a yacht builder, but he was a heavy drinker. And, you know, she was going with someone more, quote unquote, respectable. And then that was kind of His Girl Friday, very similar. Hildy was looking at this guy to be like, okay, this is this. And then, you know, despite both films having like a kind of a quippy kind of heroine, in some ways, by the end of it, they still are, quote unquote, tamed by the man, which is still, I think, what we think of when we think of 1940s films. So that was kind of interesting for me to be like, cool, it's modern, but it's also very much an artifact of that time.
At the end of it, both of them are going to get married.
Exactly. and
because that is the outcome
tamed.
that women should have. It's not enough
Exactly.
that Hildy is getting this amazing story published.
Yeah.
It's not enough that Tracy is calling off the wedding to somebody who's not a good fit. They both, it's not a happy ever after if the woman's not married. You know, I was thinking while I was watching these two about like my family. My great-grandfather, when he went off to the war, he had two sisters that he left at home. And when he got back from World War II, one of them had gone missing because she started dating somebody who had been divorced. And her parents, my great-grandparents, said, either stop dating him or get out of the house. And she walked out of the house to be with the divorced person. It was that big of a deal to not just be divorced, but to date someone who had been divorced was grounds for getting kicked out of the house. So to me, I think that's like, I mean, that was also super Irish Catholic, small town, upstate New York, not in New York City, not in, or, you know, kind of probably the main line of Philadelphia, right? But just surprised the hell out of me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's kind of, you know, go a little bit into our film scholar mode here.
Please.
Contextualizing 1940s romance in film. So this was very much the era of the screwball comedy. So it was very characterized by witty banter. One of the things you definitely see in these films is just like number of words per minute spoken by characters. They are very fast. Like, to me, it really evokes like an Amy Sherman Palladino for Gilmore Girls. It's Aaron Sorkin in West Wing or The Newsroom. Like, these characters fucking talk. They talk a lot. It's very
especially His Girl Friday, where they're both on the phone. They're both having conversations. You have to keep up with the conversations. Sometimes there's 3 or 4 people having conversations over each other that are just like rapid fire. I loved it.
The official, I think for His Girl Friday was their average rate of speech is 240 words per minute, where normal speech is 140. So there exists, and you know, part of it was Howard Hawks was the director, making those deliberate choices for realism, which was groundbreaking at the time. If you think about what sound quality was at the time, you know, obviously we'd been into the talkies for a while at this point, but sound engineering was, you know, which is one of the reasons why I like these films in an age of streaming, because I need subtitles. My ears, I really struggle to kind of hear some of the dialogue, and then when you start, you know, they're speaking at that huge speed, that definitely was a little hard to deal with. But the other thing to kind of note about this time was just, where were we in history? You know, World War II, you mentioned, and post-Depression were kind of big things that characterized this. So this was very much audiences that were looking for escapism. We don't want anything too emotionally heavy. And I love that you brought up your grandmother, because one of the things I found really interesting with this, more so with His Girl Friday, was the fact that Hildy was a career woman. Because you think in the 1940s, where so many Americans, which these films are set in the United States, is while the men went to war, women stepped into traditionally male roles. We know of, you know, Rosie the Riveter. Women were in factories, they were in offices, they were in newsrooms. And the fact that Hildy's actually a reporter, where beforehand she probably would have been a coffee girl. She'd be in the secretary pool, but she is out as an actual reporter. So the rise of working women, but at the same time, traditional values are still so dominant in the overall narrative. As you mentioned, you're getting saved by marriage. Women must be tamed. Like, this is not something that was not present at the time. They were not that modern. So these films within the time of war and post-depression, their goal was to kind of like soothe anxiety, but also like reaffirm social norms. This was not to be groundbreaking in gender roles. It was more like class, marriage, gender roles. You know, obviously these films are super heteronormative. These films are super white. They're super upper class. You know, we're not looking at poor folks. We're not looking at queer folks.
I was really relieved that the person who was on death row was white.
Yeah, because like when I was before I rewatched it, I was kind of just reading the wiki article to refamiliarize myself, and I went, oh shit.
Yeah.
Who's the guy? Because that would have been very different. There is this, I think, sense morality, again, as a part of this, is very much in there. You know, you talk about Jimmy Stewart in Philadelphia Story. I think he's such an interesting character. because for his kind of like, he's kind of a golden retriever in many ways, but he's also depicted to kind of be that moral compass. He's the one that says to Tracy, this is what is right. You know, this is the moral thing. Whereas he kind of paints her family, her dad, again, who is having an affair with a showgirl of some stripe. You know, her mother's fairly checked out. Her husband to be very much is this subtext of, I'm going to tame her. She is a trophy. So the wealthy are kind of depicted as like very stunted and not true to themselves. You know, they're very, they put on a veneer of class and moral and value when really there is nothing below that, which I find really interesting when you put strong female characters like Tracy, like Hildy up against them.
There was also a really interesting class dynamic of Mike and Liz, you know, who are the reporter and the photographer sneaking in there pretending to be part of upper class, and obviously they realize that they're not. But then he has that drunk rant at her where he's like, you don't know what you have. Like he doesn't come out and call her spoiled, but he does call her spoiled. He says like, you don't understand what it is to not have money. You don't understand what you have in this house here. And then her fiance George is like, he said like, I got out of the coal mine, and she was like, you know, he came out in his riding boots, and she was like, we need to get these dirty, like you can't wear new clean riding boots. And he's like, I thought the point of having money is that you could have clean clothes, you know. So he's more new money versus Tracy's very old money. And like Dexter's working money, but he's still wealthy. And then you have Mike, who is working class, and he even says like, I can't, that book that you just read that you loved, my book of poetry, gave me $600. It took me 2 years. I can't afford to live on that. And she's like, well, just live in my house. And he's like, no, weirdo.
Yeah. I think it's so funny how quickly Tracy realizes that they are not good friends of her brother Junius, which is the weirdest name. It was really funny. When I first started watching the Philadelphia Story, it automatically put on the commentary track from a film scholar with Turner Classic Movies. I can't remember the name of the woman. And I watched kind of the first 20 minutes with that commentary. And then, you know, she talks over the dialogue because it assumes you've seen the movie before. And I was like, okay, I need to watch it with the dialogue. But it was really interesting because even the opening scene of the Philadelphia Story takes place kind of like in the past. And it is when Dexter and Tracy are like breaking up, and it's completely silent. And it's Dexter kind of going out to his car and taking his things, and Tracy kind of like takes out one of his golf clubs, and it's like, you can tell that this is good. And then just at the end, he kind of like takes his hand and puts it on her face and just shoves her back in through the door. Like, it's just like a really interesting opening where it's like marriage is the end goal of this society, but they're still getting divorced and kind of, but then both of these films, as you said, have these divorced women who end up going back with their ex-husband. So it's almost like, see, women, you thought you didn't need this man, but he was the right one all along. So everybody, divorce is wrong. If you think you want a divorce, no, you just need to get to know your man a little bit more, because clearly he is the right one.
Especially like, there was an extent to which I could see his growth in a Philadelphia Story. He's like, I stopped drinking. I want to be there for her. I'm going to come help her out and talk to her about these things. I'm going to bail her out when she gets too drunk. Like, he does take care of her in a way that you can tell is new to him. I'm talking about Dexter. But then when we go to Philadelphia Story, he is the same person. And Hildy's complaint was, we didn't go on a honeymoon because you were working too much. And then he's like, all right, let's get remarried. And then they get a phone call and they're like, okay, I guess we can't go on. We'll make our honeymoon part of the story. You know, like, nothing has changed in that relationship. It's that she wanted him back. And so she fabricated this entire thing to get him back. And I'm like, ew.
Yeah.
I liked the reveal, but I sort of hated that there was no change to the male character's behavior. And therefore she's still going to be as miserable as she was before that, except that now she realizes that she can have a work-life balance.
Yeah. It's interesting, because I was thinking again, like, modern examples and where the influence, other than like the rat-a-tat dialogue with like Sorkin and Palladino. We're talking later this month about like Love on Vacation, and like, what is the happy for now versus like going back to like the real world after holidays. And it was so interesting that, again, both of these films ended up with them getting back with their original spouse versus modern films where people either break up and start dating other people, which is kind of what happens in these films as well. But like this idea of like, we're just going to live together. We're just going to get engaged for a really long time. Or even like the I choose myself. I honestly thought maybe more that's where His Girl Friday was going to go if I didn't know it was a romantic comedy. With Hildy just being, no, we can be partners as reporters, but I choose my career first. Like, I think it would not happen in the 40s, but I think if that one was done more modern, I feel like there was a little bit of pipe there that could have turned into, no, I choose myself. Like, I choose my career. Kind of in that, what's that movie? How to Be Single. It was not a good movie, but it was kind of that as well. It was like, no, I'm going to choose none of you because fuck all of you, really.
Right. And if her big takeaway is, no, I'm a newspaper man, which she says at one point, like where there is that rapid fire dialogue and she's not even paying attention to what she's saying because she's so busy typing. And then she says to her fiance, like, I can't go to the wedding. I'm a newspaper man. Even that gendered term to me felt like it was hitting the moment where it was, where it's like, I'm a member of this newsroom. This is my job. I belong here as a newspaper man, even though I'm wearing the skirt and that like freaking adorable hat.
I love her clothes. Oh my God, the fashion in both of these, honestly.
Oh my God, right? We have not talked about how cute, especially Hildy's perfect suit. So adorable. And her jacket and all of her accessories. Love. Like I'm a little more corporate in that way, apparently, when it comes to my 1940s heroine style.
Oh, I don't know. Tracy with her long like peignoirs and like her swimsuits. I was very
and the dress that she wore to that party that just had like the sparkles up the top and down the sleeves. Oh, I loved it.
I'd wear it now. I love her.
You would totally wear that. You would go that. Totally wear that. You would wear that for like a date in your living room with a thing of popcorn.
Like, I don't want to go out with some sparkling wine because that's how I roll on a Wednesday night. No, not Wednesday. I have my nephew on Wednesdays. Tuesdays. It would be
there. You go. Well, you don't want to be hungover for when you see your nephew on Wednesdays. So Thursdays.
Thursday nights.
Thursdays it is.
Thursday night.
But I do think that was the big takeaway that, you know, when we talk about what is the transition that the characters are going through, it was it was Hildy really embracing herself.
Yeah.
And who she is and the fact that she is a working woman and sort of like almost resigning herself to this is who I am and therefore the man that I am with has to be in this with me. You know, I can't be the society wife in Albany. I can't be on the train. And everyone in that room, all of those newspaper men kept saying like, she's not going to make it 6 months in that marriage because she belongs here. And so I think that's the biggest transition of it because there's absolutely no character growth in any of the men, but her character growth is the recognition of what she's good at and what she loves doing.
Yeah. When I was watching the Philadelphia Story, I was a little shocked by the fact that Katharine Hepburn was on screen in a swimsuit because I knew there was censorship at times. I didn't know what the current censorship was at the time of these films. I did look it up later, but I found that to be really interesting. As we've said, I found the mention that they were both divorced to be fascinating because I think we have all of these expectations and assumptions about what life was like in those times. But this brings me to the Hays Code about film censorship.
Yes, please.
And I like this because some of these things are so specific. So the Hays Code, officially called the Motion Picture Production Code, was from 1934 to 1968. So we're talking, this is World War II. This is through to like McCarthyism, through all of these things. And it was regulating Hollywood content under the guise of public morality. Now, we could do a whole fucking episode on how the Hays Code affected queer actors, queer representation, queer storylines. But that would be a whole other fucking episode. So basically it was like no overt sex, no glorified crime, no immoral behavior without punishment. So if somebody was immoral on screen, they had to be punished for it, which is why, like, I think it's really interesting to look at the comedies and screwball comedies of this era, because that's where career women are more common. If you were looking at dramas in the 1940s, most of them were like where women often suffered due to love, like very Anna Karenina vibes of you chose and guess what, you get a tragic ending, or you die tragically, or you know, you have no love, you have no life, etc. Whereas at least in comedies they could have a little bit more things. But some of the romantic restrictions within the Hays Code no explicit sexual innuendo or kissing that lasted more than 3 seconds, which is why you still do get to see kissing, but it can't be over 3 seconds. And I actually went back and I looked at a few of them and I was like, interesting. Okay.
Did you get out your stopwatch?
A little bit, yes.
Especially like in both of them, even though she was engaged, she never kissed the man except on his cheek.
Yes. Which
I
again,
loved.
seems more appropriate.
Yeah.
Also, no depiction of adultery in a positive light. Divorce had to be shown as undesirable. Women couldn't be shown as winning because of their sex appeal or promiscuity. So no using of her feminine wiles to get her ahead in life. Couples could not share a bed, even if they were married on screen.
Oh
That was very like I Love Lucy. Like
Yeah.
Desi and they had separate beds, even in the same room. So all of the emotional intimacy and like subtext it all had to be through subtext
Or dialogue.
Yes. And even then they were restricted on certain things they had to say, but yes.
Yeah, and especially like I think about that moment in Philadelphia Story where he's like, you were so drunk that you stood out naked on the balcony like a statue, and they can say that, but they and there were a couple little like, oh, you can take me. Those little innuendos, which I loved.
Yes, which I get. Like, I think it really helps with the writing. So, His Girl Friday is definitely banter. Banter is between Hildy and Walter. Walter's her husband's name. Yeah. Hildy and Walter, it's all about the dialogue. We already talked about how much they talk in that one. God. And that kind of like the speed of it kind of builds the momentum a little bit. Her career ambition is balanced by the fact that she does get married again, because that is the correct way of things. So I think when we look, like, what are your thoughts on Hildy versus Tracy, as I'll call it, a strong romantic heroine?
Well, I would say, the biggest difference between them. Yeah, I'm going to go with this. The biggest difference between them is that Hildy is so corporate that her identity is based in her career. And so her transformation is embracing her true self and her strong journalistic skills. So it's really more about coming back into herself versus Tracy is a society, debutante belle of the ball. She doesn't work outside the home. At a couple points, she even sort of has this little like ennui about not having a passion or a career or something like that. But her her transformation is entirely internal. It's not about how she's behaving outside of the home. She's a super perfectionist, demanding perfection from everyone else. Her father has had this affair and she can't forgive him and doesn't want him at her wedding, and she expects a certain level of behavior, and that's why she got divorced, because she couldn't see past any of Dexter's problems, and he drank because he felt like he wasn't good enough for her, and that drove him to drink more, and then she would nag him, and obviously it was her fault that he was drinking so much. But by the time, and her like uncle calls her like a prig, and like kind of that's her, some of her transformation is other people telling her that she's too uptight, and then she gets drunk and she kisses someone else, which is like big. That's like the best kiss in all of them is with the artist. It's not with the guy she ends up with. She doesn't get to kiss either of Cary Grant's.
No.
But I loved that sort of her transformation was letting go and relaxing and loosening up and saying like, people make mistakes and that's okay. I can forgive them.
Yeah. Tracy's growth was definitely measured by how she becomes more soft and humble, which I think makes sense for her character. But when I place it within the greater context, I'm like, oh, she became more feminine.
Yes.
So that makes her better.
And she also has these 3 men sort of vying for her attention because she is this idealized woman. And I loved that part of the way that Tracy realized her true self was Dexter's like, you're like the moon. Like, you are like the moon and you're the statue in front of the moon. And he sort of like has her on a pedestal, but he also recognizes her flaws. George, her fiance, is like, you're a goddess and I'll worship you. And she's like, but can't I just be loved? And he's like, oh yeah, that goes without saying, but also I'll worship you. And then you have Mike, who's like, no, you're a woman. You're a flesh and blood woman. And that is what the one that she kisses is the one who sees the real her. And then she doesn't marry him when he asks, which she shouldn't. She shouldn't marry the artist. She, Mike and Liz, blah, blah, blah. But, that was the transformation. It wasn't necessarily, actually, I'm just realizing this now as I'm saying this. Her transformation was internal, but it was all because the men in her life were telling her who she was. It was her ex-husband saying that you are a statue. It was her future husband telling her that she was a goddess. It was this artist telling her that she was a woman. It was her uncle telling her that she was a prig. And then all of a sudden she's like, well, I don't know what to do, because every man in her life has told her a different story about herself, and she doesn't see herself at all. Whew.
Yeah. So I found there's actually a quote with George, her fiance, who says, "You're just like some marvelous, distant, well, queen, I guess. You're so cool and fine and always so much you own. There's a kind of beautiful purity about you, Tracy, like a statue. And it's grand, Tracy. It's what everybody feels about you. It's what I first worshipped you for from afar." And she said, "I don't want to be worshipped. I want to be loved." Which is true, but I also feel like not true. She doesn't actually really want to let herself be loved. Like, I think Tracy is fascinating because when I looked at kind of like the love triangle that she's in the middle of, she's not a part of the triangle, she's in the middle of it. I was trying to figure out, I'm like, why do any of these men like her? And why does she like any of them? Because we don't get to see, like, you know, the movie that's coming out soon, The Materialists?
No,
Dakota Johnson, Pedro Pascal, Chris Evans.
I have heard about this. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so that's kind of like Dakota Johnson plays a matchmaker, and she meets Pedro Pascal. Oh my God, Daddy Pedro. Who is like this rich billionaire who she meets at an event, and he kind of starts flirting with her and they start dating. But she also runs into Chris Evans, who's an ex of hers, who she left because he wasn't ambitious enough or he wasn't as financially well off. And she's kind of like, she's a matchmaker, but stuck in between these two men. Like, from what I've seen in the trailers, like, there's just so much more narrative ground given to actually exploring the relationship and the dynamics between them. Whereas I found in these films, especially the Philadelphia story, because it has those three men kind of circling around Tracy, we didn't get a lot of that. Like, Tracy doesn't have a good friend, a girlfriend that she talks about. Oh, I'm struggling. You know, I broke up with Dexter. I left Dexter because of this. I'm marrying George because of this, but I'm also intrigued by Mike. So it made it really difficult for me to connect with any of like the romantic aspect of that film, because I'm like, to me, it doesn't feel romantic. By my modern lens, it does not feel romantic. It feels like a parable for feminine restraint.
Yes.
I still loved it, but it was not, to me, romantic in any way until the ending, even as I didn't love it too much and how it got there. It did kind of scratch that itch of happy marriage, check. It got there in the end, but the build up, I was like,
especially when he sort of like half proposed to her while she was doing the thing. It was really cute.
Yeah. It was cute at the door.
Moment,
that door scene was
cute, but not
cute.
actually a good setup to it.
Exactly.
You put a quote in our notes, so I'm definitely attributing you did the work to find this, but I'll pull it up. It's from Janine Basinger. I don't know what year it was written, but it was in a magazine that you have here that was like ended in 1960. So we know it was of the time period. It's contemporary to the release of the book, which says Tracy Lord is too perfect. The men around her must chip away at her perfection to render her acceptable as a woman. Ouch.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think about it, like, look at women even in historical, like, Regency, right? They were poised, not too educated, but they could needlework, they could do the pianoforte, they might speak another language, they would do art, they would sing, they would go to the modiste, they would go to these things. That was an acceptable woman. And Tracy has that in her background, but she is proud and she does have opinions about things. But that's what the men around her kind of chip away at, is like, your opinions aren't really relevant.
Yeah.
At all. And you can feel things, but we're going to judge you on how you feel those things. And it says wrong. Like, I think even I'm trying to find, there's another quote from the film that Dexter says to her. It says, "You'll never be a first-class human being or a first-class woman until you've learned to have some regard for human frailty," which is true. You know, to be a better person, you should have empathy. But that's not how they actually want her to display it. They want her to be quiet and not so demanding. Have fire, but not when it's inconvenient to me, the male character.
Yeah.
Which, again, 1940s. Who fucking knew, right?
I'm reading through some of your other quotes here, which I'm loving. I love this one you found by Stanley Cavell, which is like, this film is a part of a comedy of remarriage genre, which I didn't know that this was a thing either, but it makes sense within your context of if we're going to include divorce in it, it has to be seen as a mistake that was made, and then you move back into reunion. And this says where love is not a journey towards new romance, but a second chance with greater respect.
Like, and again, like, if we look at this as a second chance romance versus modern day second chance romance, these are still very different.
So different.
Which is so interesting, especially with remarriage.
In that episode with DJ Jameson, my ship for the week was a Kennedy Ryan book that was a second chance divorced couple. And do you know what the solution was? For therapy.
Okay. If you know, you know.
Yeah. Both of those, the wife, she went to therapy first. After she got the divorce, she tried multiple therapists and finally found one that worked for her. And then they realized their kid was struggling. And so they encouraged him to go to therapy. And the kid said, I'll only go if you go, Dad. So then the dad went to therapy. And then they both learned enough about themselves that it would make sense for them to get back together. There's not enough self-awareness on both sides of this for this to work for me as a second chance.
It's true. I was just looking up the idea of the remarriage. Cary Grant was married 5 times. Katharine Hepburn married once, and then she was with Spencer Tracy until his death. Rosalind Russell, who played Hildy, only married once. And now I'm looking up Jimmy Stewart. He was... only married once. Oh. Okay. So Cary Grant, he wears the suit. I guess I'll forgive him for his divorces. But that's, prior to Philadelphia Story, like Katharine Hepburn did not have a good reputation in Hollywood. She was seen as kind of like bad for films. So when Cary Grant kind of signed on to do Philadelphia Story, he demanded top billing. And he demanded a bigger salary, and he did give a lot of his salary to the war effort. It was for one of the British war somethings. So cool. But one of the ways, Katharine Hepburn kind of went along with giving him first and sole billing because she was, what do they call her? Box office poison.
Oh, my.
Yeah. But also what's interesting is the Philadelphia Story was a stage play first. And Hepburn originated the role on Broadway and then was brought to the film, which again, I just think interesting. One of the things we talked about earlier was fashion, and I was looking again at some of the kind of production stories beyond, Hepburn being box office poison and the Cary Grant's kind of relationship at the time. Is one of the things I didn't notice until I read it was how Tracy's fashion changed over the film. Early on, she's a little bit more buttoned up, kind of austere, it's very New England rich in terms of how she looked. And by the end, she's in softer, more flowing things.
Her wedding dress was so beautiful.
It's so pretty. It's so pretty. But it was this idea of, Tracy's seen as kind of like what was a feminist in the 1940s, strong female character, but she's immediately undercut by the ending because she's put back with a man who, quote unquote, tames her. So female perfection or women seeking perfection is seen as undesirable, whereas the men are praised for being like flawed. Like, he drinks. He smokes. He wants to go to a strike in Albany for our honeymoon. Oh, what a man. It's great. Ugh.
He has a mistress, but that's not about you. That's about his search for youth. And if he has a daughter who loves him, maybe he won't go sleep with other women because he'll have his connection to a woman who adores him from his daughter. What the fuck was that?
I don't even know. That was weird.
That was weird.
Yeah. What I do want to chat briefly about is just modern context. Like, where does the DNA of these films come in? So Shop Around the Corner became a Broadway show called She Loves Me. Shop Around the Corner became You've Got Mail. Literally, Meg Ryan's character's shop is called The Shop Around the Corner. Hello. You've got things like Sweet Home Alabama as an example of Reese Witherspoon's character leaves her husband for the big city, wants to get married again, and then ends up getting back with her first husband, played by Josh Lucas, and they're down south where they know the right way to do things. And it was her ambition in the city that took her away from the moral thing. But, we can see kind of modern examples again in dialogue and things like that. But I was reading about the idea of emotional restraint and how it immediately signifies a time period in movies like Brooklyn and Atonement. And I've seen Brooklyn. I haven't seen Atonement. I've read the ending of it, and I don't think I could watch it. I don't like the ending. But it's the way that those films are looked at is they intentionally use the Hays Code style restraints of like no kissing for 3 seconds, like there's no sexual anything. Atonement's got a little bit of it, but outside of that, to kind of increase romantic tension by giving it a historical setting based on censorship at the time that would have been present in films. Which again, you do see that in Brooklyn, which I think is a great movie. I think Saoirse Ronan is great in Brooklyn, as is oh my God, who's the guy that plays the Italian love interest in Brooklyn? I forget his name. Emery Cohen. Is it Emery Cohen? I don't know. They're both great. You haven't seen Brooklyn?
No, I haven't seen it.
Do you know what it is?
No.
Saoirse Ronan plays an Irish girl who emigrates to New York and starts feeling very homesick, but there's nothing home for her in Ireland. And then she meets an Italian guy and they kind of start a relationship. It's very like cultural divide. And then she gets called home to Ireland when her sister dies. And it's kind of how does she navigate the new life that she's built for herself in America versus all of like the restraint and kind of Catholic guilt that's back home in Ireland. It's set in the 1950s Brooklyn. It's a phenomenal movie. And yes, it is Emery Cohen. He's fantastic as the male love interest.
All right, I'll put it on my list.
But they use kind of similar things in terms of like how their romance is shown on screen. It's very Hays coded, I guess we'll say. Ugh. Censorship, we love it.
Before we wrap up, did this meet your expectations for this idea?
That's a great question. Yes and no. So I was actually expecting the films to not have some of the things they showed on screen. Swimming on screen. The fact that
a swimsuit. Ooh,
I would call it a swimsuit. I would not call it a bathing costume.
Yes.
Because her shoulders were showing, her décolletage was showing, like she was not wearing long pants or a skirt, like it was bathing suit bottoms. So I found that interesting. The fact that she does kind of have like this poolside makeout session that may have been more off screen with Mike. This is talking about Tracy. Hildy in the workplace and being an actual reporter and not like a secretary or a coffee girl. I found all of those really surprising and not what I expected to see on screen. So it did make me kind of sad when both of those characters got the 1940s ending of you're going to get back with your ex-husband. Again, as rom-com. Charming as they are, I kind of wish that the men had done more to earn redemption and to actually win her back as opposed to, oh, she fell in my lap. I guess I'll marry her again. I'll save her from herself. So in that way, it was kind of interesting to see. So I was satisfied in that sense. And it definitely sent me down a rabbit hole of, I do want to start exploring some of these other 1940s films, and also like what does romantic comedy look like in the 60s when free love, Vietnam War, those types of things coming in, what happens in the 70s, the 80s, and of course the golden age of the 90s. I'm very
should we make this like a running thing where
I tell you I'd be okay with it.
Yeah.
I'm down.
I don't know if there are any like 50s rom-coms. I feel like
I'll find out.
Like Eisenhower sort of had that dip. I don't know. Let's look into it.
I like it. I
like
love
the post-war. I'm very curious about this. I would love if we did this like every couple months. It's just like we go through a decade and we find a couple to watch and say like, how has this changed from the 40s to the 50s?
You know what? You know who comes in the 50s?
Who?
Marilyn Monroe.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, White Christmas, South Pacific, Some Like It Hot, Funny Face, Spencer Tracy. So Desk Set was more Katharine Hepburn. Love in the Afternoon. Okay,
babe. Yes, let's do it.
I'm down for this. Oh, this is also when you get like Sabrina and Affair to Remember and Roman Holiday are all in the 50s.
Who are we gonna? I've always wanted to see Roman Holiday and I've never watched it, so I feel like it's a good excuse to get another Hepburn in.
We're gonna put this on the list to revisit at a later time. Yes. I'm very fascinated. Meg, what did you ship the most about these 1940s films that we talked about today?
We already talked about the strong female leads, so that goes without saying. The technology, especially in His Girl Friday, where they had those phones that you had to hold one thing and then like keep the other up to your ear, but then you also had the newsroom where you had multiple phones going on, and like, I loved just seeing the costume design, the set design, the roll top desk in His Girl Friday. Like there was so much that was so of the time, but also felt modern in a way, in the way that you would expect a newsroom to still feel like that loud, constantly talking thing. But the technology was old, but it didn't hold them back. And that was just a really freaking cool thing to see, is the way that now we would be on our cell phones with our laptops open. It was the same. It was just the old school phones and the typewriters. And that was so satisfying.
Oh, I like it.
I think I like that the best. Philadelphia Story, I wasn't like, oh, look, a horse and carriage. And like, oh, look, the old cars. Like, some of that was interesting. Like, going to the public library and like, oh, there's no computers, just books. Like, that wasn't as exciting. But the newsroom in particular was maybe my favorite part of the whole thing. What about you, Nikki? What are you shipping about the 1940s rom-coms?
There is a very specific moment in A Philadelphia Story that made me laugh, and we've alluded to it. It's the door scene when Tracy calls off the wedding. She's like, no, I'm not going to marry Kittredge. I'm going to just tell these people and I'll deal with it. And she opens up the door to all the guests and they look at her and she goes, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. So then Dexter kind of comes over and starts whispering to her, like he gives her a couple words at a time, like, thank you for coming. There's been an error. And then all of a sudden he kind of starts leaking into the fact that the wedding is not going to be moving forward today, but the wedding that was supposed to happen a couple years ago is now going to happen. And then, he's being kind of very, I'll say, quippy with this. And it's kind of, I do like the setup, even as I don't really believe it. I wish it had been a little bit more modern by my taste, but again, it's not. It was made in 1940. But when she realizes that he's saying, I want to marry you again, the way she turns around and gets really excited, look on her face, and kind of puts her hand on his chest and turns around back to the audience, the wedding guests that are waiting to kind of tell what's actually going to happen. I do like the moment. I think it's filmed beautifully. Like, how it looks is great. The dialogue is great.
The actors did phenomenal with it.
Phenomenal. I just wish there had been a little bit more of that, but of course there wouldn't be. That's not what the film is. But I did love that moment.
And then when Jimmy Stewart turns to Cary Grant, he's like, we're going to be the worst dressed people here. And they're both in suits. And you're like,
Yeah. Yes, you monstrous man, Jimmy Stewart.
You aren't in a tux. You're only in a suit. How dare you?
I know. It's rude, really. It's very rude.
Well, if you've seen either of these movies, come on over to our Substack. Tell us what you love. DM us on Instagram, TikTok. Leave us a comment in YouTube. Let us know what you loved. We want to hear from you. And now, Nikki, before we sign off, what are you shipping this week?
I want to talk about this really fantastic series I started watching on Netflix called Department Q. I find it very difficult to start new TV shows recently. I think it's because I just want the comfort watch of something I've already seen, and I don't really know if something's going to be good or bad. But I logged onto Netflix and it said, hey, new thing. And I always watch the trailer of new things to just get a vibe. Like, what language is it in? Who are the main actors? What's the main storyline? So I watched the trailer for Department Q. And as soon as I watched it, I'm like, oh, this is a Nordic remake of something. It is. It's a remake of a Danish book series that was turned into a Danish series of films. It stars Matthew Good, who I love as an actor. Love Matthew Good. So it is kind of like a police procedural. Basically, Matthew Good stars as a detective inspector who was shot in the line of duty. Another cop was killed. His partner was paralyzed, and he's just now coming back to work. And he's very smart, but he's very abrasive, and most people don't like him. So, he's trying to interfere with these other cases, and he's generally making a nuisance of himself and his boss under pressure from her bosses and the government, essentially gives him ownership of a new department to look into cold cases. And he cannot be fucking asked to do anything. Like, he doesn't want to do any of this shit. He just wants to look into his own shooting. But he gets given, they call it Department Q, because it's in the basement in what used to be the shower quarters. And it's like, there's no money. It's shitty. He has no interest. And he's given an assistant as a Syrian man who has just come over from Syria. And he wants to be a cop, but he just works in IT right now. So trying to get him involved with things. And they're told to essentially find a cold case that will give us a lot of good press so that you can kind of keep your job. We can all keep our jobs. And that's the only way that you can get more money. So they pick I don't really want to ruin which case they do, because the first episode has a really great setup to it. But they do find this case. He's working with his civilian employee assistant, Akram, and they bring in all these other people. It has some amazing twists in it. I did not spoil this show for myself. Normally I read the Wikipedia before I watch a show, so I know exactly what's going to happen. I did not. It's 9 episodes. They all run between 45 minutes and an hour and 20 minutes. Like, I think the finale is an hour and a half. It's great. You have no idea where it's going. The layers of the story are so good. Lot of really good drama. Department Q is so good. Like, as soon as I finished the first episode, I texted my family group chat and I was like, guys, we have to watch the show. We have to discuss it. And then something with Netflix glitched and it removed the entire show from my Netflix for about 24 hours. I had just finished episode 1 and it ended in a great way. And I was like, I need to watch episode 2. And then it was completely gone.
No.
It was not even available on search. It like disappeared from Netflix, and it wasn't until the next day that it came back, and then I watched like 3 episodes in a row. So if you like procedural kind of thriller dramas that are also like a self-contained storyline, there is a story that would continue into season 2 if it gets renewed for that, but the main plot is resolved. It's fantastic. It's so good. Matthew Good is amazing. Alexei Manilov plays Akram, is so good. Highly recommend watching Department Q. Meg, what you be shipping?
Very different from police procedural. Okay, so mine is a book called Read Between the Lines. It is one that I downloaded from Kindle Unlimited when you and I were going, okay, we're going to read more sapphic lesbian romance. And so it showed up in my recommendations, and it had the Kindle Unlimited with audio. And I was like, double sold, because now I can listen to it while I'm mowing the lawn.
There you go.
And so I pulled it up this week because it was nice enough to mow the lawn. And it is Shop Around the Corner retelling. I didn't realize. I mean, I sort of saw it in the blurb.
Yeah.
But I wanted to bring it up in this episode, even though I'm only at 80%, because it was so relevant to our conversation. Even though we didn't watch Shop Around the Corner, we considered it in our list, so it feels relevant. But it is 2 characters who live in New York City. There's Rosie, who owns the bookshop, and there's Jane, who is the property development manager, who sent the eviction letter to say, you have to move out. We're going to raise the entire building that your mom has like opened the bookshop. You grew up in this bookshop. But Jane also, in addition to being the property development manager, has a side hustle writing lesbian romance novels. And Rosie's favorite author is Jane's pen name.
Oh.
So they're having this secret conversation, anonymous conversation on Twitter, where they've connected there and started DMing each other. And then, Jane's niece drags her into the shop, and so she meets Rosie, and she feels super guilty because she just sent her an eviction letter. And then they decide to meet in person after talking on Twitter for a long time, and Jane walks in and it's Rosie, and she's like, I can't go introduce myself to this person who I'm evicting, even though I know I'm attracted to her and I really like her. She's probably my best friend from these Twitter conversations. I don't want to ruin it. But then Rosie thinks she's been stood up. And so it's a really interesting, good setup. That all happens within the first 30%, and then you get the fallout really quickly, and then they sort of band together to figure out how to save the store or how to find a new location for the store.
Oh.
I don't know how it ends. It's actually pretty low conflict because they have this kind of structural, here's the problem, here's the timeline they have to get out by the end of the year situation. It's a little low angst for me, but if you're looking for a low angst lesbian romance, this is a great choice for you. And again, it's called Read Between the Lines, because Between the Pages is the name of the bookstore. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yay, happy endings in an episode that had some interesting happy endings to them. Well, that is it for all of us this week. If you'd like to support the show, there are a couple free ways you can do that. One, head on over to your podcast provider of choice, give us a rate, review, and subscribe. Helps more people find out about us. Share us with a friend. Who do you know that would like to know about 1940s romantic comedies and all of our excellent recommendations? I know I only listen to podcasts and read books that people recommend to me, so you too can be that person. Then you can follow us on social media. You can see our happy smiling faces. Let us know your thoughts. We are on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube under First Dates and Soulmates, and we would greatly appreciate a follow, a like, a share. It makes us happy. And we don't have to go back to an ex-husband. Always great situations. And if you do have a little bit of money to send our way, 2 ways you can do that. You can support us by subscribing on Substack for the price of a cup of coffee a month. You can send us a little money each month to help support all the work we do in the show.
And a shout out to Helen, who is our most recent paid subscriber. So thank
you, Helen. I'm your number 1 fan. We also have merch available on TeePublic, where you can get some of our most popular sayings on t-shirts, mugs, stickers, notebooks, tote bags, all manner of things, and that is linked for you in the show notes. I myself have a Tingles in the Groiny Bit sticker and a Justice for Operations Professional sticker on my laptop, and it makes me very satisfied every time I am out in public with my computer. Everybody can know about the tingles. The tingles will soon surround the world.
Gross.
And thank you. You're welcome.
And we will be back next week where we'll be talking about the love on vacation trope. So if you love romances that are road trips, that are girls' weekends, that are bachelorette parties, that are people taking their solo honeymoons after they've been left at the altar, tune in next week because we'll be talking through all of those love on vacation romances. Thank you, Nikki.
Bye.